Hi everyone, this is Jack from Maths Forge, and in today's lesson we're going to be doing surds. So what a surd essentially is an irrational number represented by a square root symbol. So let's say we have the square root of 2. The square root of 2 outputs a number that is irrational, which means it does not have a specific number of decimal places. It keeps going forever. And of course, this square root of 2 represents that number entirely, and this is the surd. And of course, if you're thinking of a number that's 1 larger than this, so 2.41, and then it keeps going on forever, well, this is just going to be 1 plus root 2. And of course, this entire number here is a surd. And of course, this will give us 2.41. It will give us the exact same number as the square root of 2, but exactly 1 higher than it. So a surd is an irrational number represented by the square root of a number, or a combination of the square root of a number and whole numbers. So let's take a look at the first example. So here we're being asked to add 12 root 6 plus 9 root 6. How you add and subtract surds is very similar to how you add and subtract variables. If you are adding or subtracting the same square roots, well, then it's just a matter of collecting like terms. So I have 12 root 6s, and I'm adding it to 9 root 6s. So how many root 6s do I have in the end? Well, it's just going to be 12 plus 9, which is 21. And this should be our final answer. So we're essentially collecting like terms. If we check our answer, there it is. We'll do another one-star example with subtraction. You can see here that we have the same root 14 and root 14, and we're subtracting them from each other. So I have 14 lots of them here and 8 lots of them here. And of course, 14 minus 8 lots of root 14 will leave us with a root 14, but how many of them? It's going to leave us with 6 lots of root 14, because of course 14 minus 8 is 6. And if we check our answer, there it is. Now for the 2-star examples, we're expected to simplify these surds. And in most cases, they'll tell you to write out this surd in the form of a root b, or they'll just ask you to simplify this surd fully. So how do we simplify this surd? Okay, so one of the rules of surds is that if you're multiplying the square root of a number, so I'm just going to say the square root of a times the square root of b, you're multiplying it to the square root of another number, this will simplify to give you the square root of a times b. So this is a very powerful rule for surds, and we're going to use this to solve this problem here, the square root of 56. So let's simplify the square root of 56. I'm going to break down the square root of 56 into 2 numbers being multiplied together. And there are a bunch of 2 numbers that multiply to give you 56. 56 has a lot of factors. We could do 2 times 28. But you see, 2 times 28, although you can break 56 into these numbers, are not going to help you. You see, when you actually write these 2 numbers in here, 2 and 28, the next step is for the square root to go over them individually. And since neither of these numbers are square numbers, none of them will break down to give you a whole number. So I will not choose 2 times 28. I have to think of 2 numbers that multiply to give you 56, and at least one of them has to be a square number. And in this case, the numbers I'm thinking of are 4 and 14. 4 times 14 gives me 56, and 4 is a square number. Because it's a square number, in the next stage, when it gets a square root over it, it's going to break down into a whole number. So let's see what that looks like. Here we're going to have the square root of 4 times the square root of 14, going by this rule here for surds. And of course, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 14, well, 14 is not a square number, so it can't be simplified, and it actually can't be broken down any further, because the only factors of 14 are 1, 2, 7, and 14, and none of those numbers are square numbers. So the square root of 14 is the most we can simplify it. So now, how do we actually simplify 2 times root 14? Well, just like algebra, when you're multiplying a whole number or a number to a square root, you just bring them together next to each other like this, and this is fully simplified. So this should be our final answer, 2 root 14, and if we check our answer, there it is. We'll do another 2-star example. So remember, we want to break up this root 24 into 2 numbers, and one of the numbers has to be a square number. So if you pick 2 and 12, well, then you're going to run into a problem. Neither of these numbers are square numbers. The number I want to choose is 4 and 6, because of course 4 is a square number. So now when the square root distributes over the 4 and distributes over the 6, the square root of 4 simplifies to give us 2. And of course, the square root of 6 cannot simplify any further, so it stays as it is. And 2 times root 6 is just 2 root 6. So if we check our answer, there it is. We'll do another 2-star example. So here we're being asked to multiply the square root of 7 and the square root of 5. Remember from the rule in Surds that if you multiply 2 surds together, they just give you one big surd with the individual numbers multiplied together within that square root. So here, we're just going to have one big surd with 7 times 5, which is 35. And if we check our answer, there it is, the square root of 35. And now for our final 2-star example, we have the square root of 30 over the square root of 2, and we should simplify this. Just like multiplication with surds, if you are dividing 2 surds by each other, so 2 square roots, then this will leave you with one single square root and both numbers dividing by each other within the square root. So if we take this rule of surds and apply it to this question, we should end up with one big square root and then 30 over 2 within the square root. And of course 30 divided by 2 is 15, and the square root of 15 cannot be simplified further. So if we check our answer, there it is. Now let's do a 3-star example. Here we're being asked to simplify the square root of 48 over the square root of 6. So remember from our previous rule for the 2-star examples, if you have a square root divided by another square root, you can simply just write one large square root symbol and the numbers within it, 48 divided by 6. Now because I know my times tables, 48 divided by 6 I know will give us 8. Now, the square root of 8 is not the final answer since it can be simplified further. And how can we simplify the square root of 8 further? Well, we can break it up into 2 numbers. One of them has to be a square number. I'm thinking of 4 times 2. And of course, the square root symbol distributes over both numbers. And we have the square root of 4 multiplied by the square root of 2. The square root of 4 is 2. And the square root of 2 cannot be simplified. So our final answer should be 2 root 2. And if we check our answer, there it is. So just be careful with the 3-star example. It's a combination of the 1 and the 2-star examples combined. And that's it for our lesson on surds.